After an 8-year coma, a police officer finds himself in a world where clothing is forbidden. Franck wakes up in a hospital, only to be surprised to find that he doesn't even have a patient gown or a blanket. Dazed, he gets up to search for clothes in the room's closet but finds it empty. With no other choice, he wraps himself in some curtains before leaving his room. To his surprise, he finds the janitor cleaning without any uniform. He tries to call out to her for help but ends up fainting. When he wakes up, he is greeted by Nurse Mathilde, who fortunately is wearing a uniform. Franck is now in patient pajamas and has a blanket. Mathilde reminds him how he took a bullet for a colleague during a police raid, which is why he is in the hospital. Franck tries to speak but finds he cannot. Instead, he uses a whiteboard to ask what date it is, and to his surprise, he learns he has been in a coma for 8 years. The nurse then tries to tell him something but decides it's better for the doctor to explain. Instead, she asks for a selfie with him, given that a patient waking up after 8 years is a big event. Soon, Franck's parents, Sergei and Natalie, visit him and also take a selfie with him to commemorate the event. Despite this, the man is happy to see familiar faces. Sergei even brags about how his son was a good policeman for saving his colleague's life. However, he regrets how the hospital bills have drained their savings. Hearing this, Franck asks about his health insurance, and his parents laugh, pointing out that they no longer have it because many things have changed in recent years. Franck then asks about his wife, and his mood turns solemn as they explain that she took it very badly. Just then, Dr. Gonzalez arrives and advises his patient to take things easy. Franck then mentions seeing the janitor without any uniform, and this worries his companions. Dr. Gonzalez simply tells him that coma patients tend to have realistic dreams, and this convinces Franck. After leaving his room, the doctor tells his parents that the clothes make the man approach seems to keep Franck calm. Natalie already wants to take her son home, but both the doctor and her husband agree that they first need to let him get used to things. With that, Dr. Gonzalez starts to take off his clothes and asks the parents to tip the staff. Apparently, the government had stopped funding hospitals, so the staff could use the money. Later, Franck gets bored and tries to turn on the television, but he can't. Then he tries to go out, but the door and windows are locked. Soon, Mathilde brings him a soy burger for lunch, claiming that meat is unhealthy, so they stopped consuming it 5 years ago. She also mentions how the temperature has risen lately and France had to take in refugees from Monaco as the place was destroyed. This leaves Franck upset all day, so he tries to escape, only to find Mathilde watching the door when he manages to open it. She prevents him from leaving, stating that staying in bed is for his own good. Desperate, Franck asks to call his wife, but the nurse refuses. Eventually, he manages to visit his doctor in his office. The patient wants to leave, but Dr. Gonzalez insists that they still need to monitor him, especially because his vocal cords haven't recovered yet. Readapting to the outside world will also be a challenge. With this in mind, Dr. Gonzalez asks how well Franck handles transparency, and the patient simply shrugs. At that moment, a man appears outside cleaning the window, and he is completely naked. This unsettles Franck, but when the doctor looks again, the man is already gone. After their session, Dr. Gonzalez and Mathilde discuss the patient while taking off their uniforms. They agree that he is still not ready to face the outside world, but the nurse worries that all the secrecy makes Franck more nervous. With this, she suggests giving him a radio so he can feel connected to the world without seeing too much. Because of this, Franck gets a radio in his room, although he becomes curious when a reporter mentions that robberies have been reduced to 12 cases in a year thanks to the new policy against crime and violence. He also hears an advertisement about towels that can prevent viruses from entering the body when sitting in public places. Determined to find out what is going on, the man forces the lock on his door again and sneaks out of his room. To his surprise, he discovers that the lobby is full of patients, visitors, and staff members wearing nothing except a few with transparent coats. The shock makes him faint. Franck wakes up tied to his bed with his parents and the doctor beside him. Dr. Gonzalez finally explains that the transparency law was passed 5 years ago, which prevents people from hiding anything. This includes presenting oneself completely to the public. Since he already knows this, Franck's pajamas have been taken off, and his companions also remove their clothes, welcoming him to the new world. However, Franck's panic causes him to scream for the first time since he woke up. They try to assure him that he will eventually adapt to the new world, but Franck refuses to go out without clothes. Seeing him upset, the doctor promises that he will adapt after undergoing therapy. Natalie also assures him that life is simpler this way, though Frank just rolls his eyes. Once he is alone, he is finally allowed to use the television, only to see that even the athletes aren't wearing anything during sports games. Upset, he goes to his doctor and demands to be let out, refusing to adapt to this new law. Dr. Gonzalez assures him that since its implementation, there has been less violence and insecurity among people. Later, Mathilde brings Frank his food, but he has blocked the door, refusing to see her. The nurse calls Dr. Gonzalez for help, but the patient claims he is going on a hunger strike against this new law. Mathilde offers to bring him real meat, and this truly tempts Frank. However, doing so would be both illegal and costly. With a smile, Dr. Gonzalez approves, noting that they can charge Frank's parents for it. When he receives his food later, Frank listens to the radio and learns that Jean Lanvin, the man who proposed the transparency law, is missing. Soon, his co-worker Lucy and his best friend Camille arrive at the hospital to visit him. Dr. Gonzalez warns them that he is still in shock from the new world, but Lucy assures him that they know how to handle it. When they reach his room, Frank lights up. Lucy takes the opportunity to thank him for saving her 8 years ago, which the man dismisses. Being with his close friends causes Frank to finally break down, unable to adapt to this new world. He prays to regain his former life, which worries Lucy, as he won't be in a condition to return to work. She mentions that she was promoted to captain 2 years ago, and that she and Camille started dating after they ran into each other while visiting Frank in the hospital. Camille then laments how he thought he had lost his best friend, so he hugs Frank, who feels uncomfortable with the contact. When the couple leaves, Dr. Gonzalez takes the opportunity to ask the new police captain if she can cancel his parking tickets. However, seeing her look at him suspiciously, he backtracks and only asks if he can pay the fines using his phone. Lucy promises to do something about it before reminding him that transparency means no more preferential treatment. The doctor then goes to his patient's room and shows him a news report about the disappearance of Jean Lanvin. After the man proposed the transparency law, the Prime Minister was assassinated in an attack, which triggered a wave of protests. This only accelerated the implementation of the transparency law. Dr. Gonzalez admires the man, but Frank calls the law a dictatorship. He even suggests that some people might still be wearing clothes out there. This enrages his doctor, who yells at him before storming out. Soon, Frank is forced into therapy where Dr. Gonzalez and Mathilde make him get used to being naked. This makes Frank feel miserable, but he is happy when his wife, Eve, finally visits him. The woman insists she has been busy since she is working for the mayor, but Frank doesn't care as they have finally reunited. Changing the subject, she asks him how he is, and the man mentions that he feels fine, although he hasn't accepted this new law. Eve insists that the change is for the better, and all of Europe has adapted to it, except for the United Kingdom. Frank then tries to kiss his wife, but she pushes him away. Finally, she reveals that she is with someone else. Unfazed, Frank forgives her because he believes they can be together again. However, Eve points out that Frank was selfish and unfaithful during their marriage. With that, she leaves angrily. Shortly after, Dr. Gonzalez tells the parents that Frank is ready to be discharged. He believes that being at home will also help his patient adapt to the new society. With no other option, Frank leaves the hospital for the first time in 8 years. He discovers that the world has completely changed, with everyone being naked. Meanwhile, Lucy heads to a forest where Jean Lanvin's body has been tied up and dressed in a suit. 8 years ago, Frank and Lucy were watching an area for a suspect, although the man didn't think the arrest was a good idea. He wondered if they should wait for their suspect to lead them to his accomplices, but Lucy insisted on continuing, given that someone had already stolen evidence from the station. She believed her suspect had inside help, although Frank wasn't convinced. Even so, he offered to proceed with the operation while his partner stayed behind. Lucy objected, stating that he couldn't be protective of her just because they had slept together. She also pointed out that the suspect was hers, so she should personally arrest him. Frank argued that he was in charge of the case, and even so, Lucy went to confront the suspect, which led to the man shooting at them. Later that day, Mayor Legrand received news about a police officer in critical condition. When he mentioned it was Frank Fish, the mayor's assistant, Simone, recognized that the officer was married to Eva, about whom he knew too much. Soon, Eva visited her husband in the hospital, worried about what her life would be like now that he was in a coma. However, she also commented that her husband now seemed to be at peace. For years later, an employee at a clothing store became concerned upon hearing that the transparency law would be implemented the following day. Just then, a hooded woman arrived and asked to buy shorts with a 50% discount. He directed her to the back, where she found Legrand inside a fitting room. Another man said the same thing to the clerk before heading to the fitting room. The clerk then closed the store before joining the group. There, Legrand began his meeting to plan their insurrection against the new law. They swore to restore the use of clothing, believing that many would join them. Meanwhile, Simone, now mayor, assured Jean Lambin that they could correctly enforce the new law. Jean insisted that some restrictions be included with the transparency law, so they should also be implemented. He warned Simone that if his law was misused, he would testify about it in the media. Undaunted, Simone reminded Jean that his law wouldn't have been pushed forward without him. At the hospital, Lucy and Camille visited Franck when Mathilde arrived to remove the patient's clothes. Camille complained, as he did not want to see his friend in that state. He also refused to see his clients without his training outfit at the gym. Lucy assured him that it was all about telling the truth, but Camille argued that he liked his privacy. Still, Lucy thought that if he had nothing to hide, it would be fine. With this in mind, she invited him to her party to celebrate the Transparency Act. Camille hesitated but accepted anyway. As she left, Lucy ran into Franck's parents, who also had doubts about the new law. They, like many others, had stocked up on supplies to reduce their need to go out after the law was implemented. When she got home, Lucy took off her clothes to start getting used to her new way of life. She admired herself in the mirror before getting ready for her party. She even ordered a standee of Franck to make it look like he was there. Already drunk, she pretended that Franck was apologizing to her. However, she didn't accept them, pointing out that he ruined their relationship when he confessed his love and she just wanted something more than sleeping together. Just at that moment, Eve arrived, having been invited by Camille. When she saw her husband's podium, Lucy quickly defended that she had gotten it so they would feel like he was there, given that she had invited her friends and colleagues. Seeing the man's face, Eve became furious and railed at Lucy about how Franck was being unfaithful to her, although she didn't know who the other woman was. The atmosphere lightened up when Camille and Lucy's colleagues finally arrived. After midnight, when the transparency law officially came into effect, the group played a game to start taking off their clothes. However, one person refused to take off his shirt, shouting that he wasn't an animal. This effectively ended the party. As Camille prepared to leave, Lucy tried to say something but ended up backing away and asking him to take Franck's podium instead. They stared at each other, but eventually, the man left with a simple goodbye. The next morning, Lucy took off her dress before starting her day. More people easily adopted the new lifestyle, although some were still hesitant and tried to cover up. Meanwhile, Legrand and his group retreat to the forest to escape from this strange society. Later that day, Camille visited Lucy to show her that he was also adapting to this new world. This marked the beginning of their relationship. In the present, the recovered Franck continues to reject this society, so he hurries to his parents' garage one morning to find some clothes. Natalie reveals that they have already thrown away his clothes along with hers. This disheartens him, especially since it seems his ex-wife had left the rest of his belongings at his parents' house, making him feel like he has completely lost his old life. His mother assures him that things will get better before going to the kitchen to prepare breakfast for him. Despite this, when Franck sees a photo of himself and Eva, he throws it away angrily. He joins his parents for breakfast wearing the only clothes he could find. His parents frown but don't comment on it. However, Franck realizes that knives are also banned because they are considered weapons, so they cut their food with scissors. Unable to bear it, Sergei warns his son that walking outside in clothes might make him look suspicious. He even argues that the fabric of the clothes is full of chemicals that are harmful to him. When his son refuses to listen, Sergei states that he has a reputation to maintain, so Franck shouldn't embarrass him. Eventually, Franck attempts to go outside clumsily without clothes but runs back inside within seconds. Later that day, Sergei tries to convince his son to be proud of the body he was given, thinking he's simply embarrassed. He recalls also having doubts about the law, but after a while, he accepted that bodies come in different shapes and sizes, and there's nothing wrong with that. That afternoon, the parents learn of the news of Jean Lambin's death. Franck joins them when the news report includes a statement from Simone, who notes that they have enjoyed peace since the transparency law was implemented. He then promises to capture and execute those who killed Jean. While his parents are moved by this, Franck simply asks to change the channel. Given their son's attitude, his parents organize a backyard party that weekend, hoping it will help him adjust to his new lifestyle. Camille and Lucy are the first to arrive, so Sergei asks them to help Franck get used to his new world. Dr. Gonzalez and Mathilde are also invited, and seeing them outside frustrates Frank. Later, he approaches Lucy and asks her what happened to the people who refused to go out without clothes. She explains that about 10% of the population simply stays home to avoid having to present themselves to the public. However, some of them end up depressed before disappearing. Lucy worries that Frank might end up like that, but he assures her he won't. Soon, Natalie gathers everyone for a group photo, and her son hesitates before joining in. While everyone continues to have fun, Frank finds solace in alcohol. Drunk, he insults the group for their customs and insists on maintaining his dignity. However, he suddenly breaks down, crying and pleading to have his wife and life back. With this in mind, he decides to go see Eve, but everyone stops him as it's illegal to be in public while dressed. In the end, Frank collapses crying before returning inside the house. The next morning, Frank borrows his mother's car but is forced to follow the new law. He drives to his old house with Eve, and his ex-wife is enraged to see him. Frank tries to convince her to get back together, only to find out that Eve's new partner is the current mayor, Simone. If you liked the summary, don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button. It's free and really helps me keep growing.